Have you ever wondered how did the world fall into such a devastating conflict as World War II? A war that claimed the lives of over 70 million people and left deep scars in the heart of humanity. Today, we will explore the underlying causes, untold stories, and invaluable lessons from this war. The 20th century began with a global upheaval, World War I. This brutal conflict not only buried millions of lives, but also brought down the old world order. The post-war treaties, especially the Treaty of Versailles, sowed bitter seeds across Europe, creating a fractured, disoriented world. In that context, the global economic crisis of 1929 struck like a hammer, shattering the last remnants of hope, pushing many nations into chaos. From those ashes, fascism rose, fueled by rage, ruthlessness, and a darkness that once again engulfed humanity. After World War I, the victorious powers led by Britain, France, and the United States gathered at Versailles in 1919 to determine the fate of defeated Germany. The result was a treaty filled with punishment. Germany was forced to cede territory, losing Alsace-Lorraine to France, its colonies in Africa and Asia, and having the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, occupied by the Allies. Reduce its military to the bare minimum, with no air force, no submarines, and only a small standing army. Pay war reparations amounting to a massive sum equivalent to hundreds of billions of today's US dollars. Accept full responsibility for starting the war clause. 231, widely regarded as a national humiliation that deeply angered the German people. The Treaty of Versailles failed to bring lasting peace. It turned Germany into a humiliated nation, economically strangled and politically disoriented. Within that wounded nation, the fire of revenge smoldered, waiting for the moment to ignite. In October 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, marking the beginning of the Great Depression, a global economic crisis. Its impact spread to Europe, Asia, and nearly every economy in the world. The consequences included a collapse in industrial production with surplus goods and plummeting prices, mass unemployment pushing millions into poverty, a collapse of faith in liberal democracy, which had been seen as the guiding model for the post-war world. In Germany, already reeling from Versailles, the crisis swept away all fragile efforts of reconstruction. Unemployment soared to nearly 30%. People lost faith in the Weimar Republic, the democratic government established after the war. Poverty, anger, and a sense of betrayal led the public to turn to radical promises of salvation. In the midst of that chaos, two figures bearing the image of saviors stepped onto the stage of history: Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany. Mussolini, a former journalist and World War I veteran, took advantage of the discontent among Italian workers and the middle class to found the Fascist Party in 1919. In 1922, he organized the March on Rome, forcing King Victor Emmanuel III to appoint him as prime minister. Mussolini quickly established a dictatorship, took control of the media-banned opposition parties, and promoted the ideal of a new Rome. Hitler, leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party NSDAP, was also a former soldier in the war. He promised to create jobs, restore national pride, and break the chains of Versailles. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Shortly after, he consolidated power, turned Germany into a dictatorship, eliminated political rivals, and spread anti-Semitic ideology, radical nationalism, and the vision of a Third Reich. Both men skillfully exploited fear loss, of faith and social instability to manipulate public emotion. They turned fear into a tool and transformed their nations into war machines. Not only in Germany and Italy, but both Europe and Asia also fell into severe instability. In Spain, a bloody civil war broke out between the Republicans and the Nationalists, led by General Franco and supported by Hitler and Mussolini, turning the country into a testing ground for fascist ideology. In Japan, a brief democratic period was replaced by a militarist regime. Military leaders pushed aggressive expansionism, occupying Manchuria in 1931 and invading China in 1937, marking the beginning of the Asia-Pacific War. In the Soviet Union under Stalin's rule, another form of totalitarianism, communism, was firmly established, contributing to the rise of a deeply polarized world. Like falling dominoes, instability spread from one nation to another. International organizations like the League of Nations proved powerless, while Western powers were weary, passive, and at times even appeased evil in an attempt to preserve fragile peace. History is not just a collection of dates, it is the echo of past mistakes. From Versailles to the economic crisis, from democratic ballots handed to dictators, we learn this democracy can only survive when people maintain faith, when societies are just, and when individuals are protected from poverty, injustice, and fear. The rise of fascism was not a historical anomaly. It was the logical outcome of a society that failed to shield its people from despair. When ideals are distorted, when freedom is abused, and when suffering is weaponized for political gain, that is when darkness takes power. World War I ended, but peace did not come, only a brief silence before an even greater storm. Fascism rose as an inevitable chain reaction from the injustices of Versailles to economic chaos. If we fail to heed the lessons of the past, history may repeat itself not as a tragedy, but as a curse. We often think war begins with a single event, but in reality it is the result of many factors building up over time. Injustice, poverty, and hatred created the perfect environment for extremist ideologies to thrive. World War II was a landscape painted in blood and steel, where each battle was not just a clash of weapons, but a rewriting of history, with sweat, intellect, and unyielding will. Amidst the smoke of gunfire and devastated fields, a few battles became monumental, turning points shifting the entire course of the war. Stalingrad, winter 1942-1943, one of the bloodiest battles in human history. After a series of lightning victories across Europe, Nazi Germany believed capturing the city bearing Stalin's name would be a fatal blow to the Soviet Union. But the Soviet army chose Stalingrad as the place to die rather than retreat. In the face of brutal cold, the German forces were stalled, their supply lines cut off, and eventually encircled. The battle resulted in over 2 million casualties, a staggering number. A true story amid the rubble, a soldier named Vasily Zaitsev became a symbol of courage. As a sniper, Zaitsev killed over 200 German soldiers, spreading fear among enemy ranks. But what made him legendary was not just his precise shooting, it was his ability to fight in silence in the freezing cold and in utter isolation. He was living proof that victory doesn't come only from tanks, but from unshakable determination. In the Pacific, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan believed it had gained the upper hand. But in June 1942, the Battle of Midway changed everything. Thanks to deciphering Japanese naval codes via the SIGINT intelligence system, the U.S. knew in advance about Japan's surprise plan to strike Midway. The result, in just a few days, the U.S. Navy sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a loss the Empire of the Rising Sun could never recover from. The Battle of Midway was not just a tactical victory, it was a testament to the power of intelligence, technology, and preparation. In an era where information could mean the difference between life and death, this was a battle won on paper before a single bullet was fired. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The Allied landing in Normandy was the largest amphibious invasion in history, with over 150,000 soldiers crossing the English Channel under heavy gunfire to open a Western front against Nazi Germany. This campaign marked the peak of coordinated alliance strategy involving the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and European resistance forces. Thousands of aircraft, warships, and tanks operated simultaneously in a complex combat network. But what remains most memorable isn't the number, it's the self-sacrificing spirit of the soldiers who opened the gates to freedom, knowing full well that many of them would never return. World War II was not only a war of bullets and steel, it was the fiercest technological race of its time. Radar and sonar allowed early detection of aircraft and submarines, redefining the art of defensive warfare. The German Enigma machine, once thought unbreakable, was deciphered by Alan Turing and the British intelligence team, giving the Allies a crucial edge in many operations. V-2 rockets and jet aircraft. Germany's ambitious inventions could not reverse the tide of war, but laid the groundwork for post-war technological revolutions. Victory didn't go to those with the most weapons, but to those who knew how to use information, predict the enemy's moves, and act one step ahead. If war is humanity's greatest tragedy, then in its darkest moments, people can still shine like legends. Vasily Zaitsev in Stalingrad, as previously mentioned. Spies in Normandy posing as farmers, relaying critical intel to the Allies. American pilots at Midway flying into battle knowing theirs was a one-way mission with no return. They were ordinary people in the extraordinary times who chose extraordinary actions. The Allied victory did not come from one single battle, but from a convergence of timely strategy, superior technology, sharp intelligence, and above all, human willpower. From Stalingrad to Normandy, from Midway to the code-breaking rooms of Enigma, history was not only written by generals, but by each soldier, each scientist, each civilian who refused to surrender to the darkness. On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany unconditionally surrendered. And just 3 months later, on August 15th, Japan declared surrender after 2 atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World War II came to an end, leaving behind a world exhausted in both body and spirit. The image of Hiroshima engulfed in flames of innocent lives turned to ash in an instant will forever stand as a tragic symbol of war's ultimate destruction. But that was only part of the tragedy. The war claimed the lives of over 70 million people, with millions more missing, displaced, or permanently disabled. Yet no number can fully capture the pain and suffering that humanity endured. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration camps like Auschwitz, where life was stripped away in systematic, brutal, and inhumane ways. Hundreds of thousands of children were left orphaned, growing up among ruins and unshakable memories. An entire generation of young soldiers from east to west carried psychological scars that never healed. But war doesn't just kill with bombs and bullets, it kills faith in humanity, forcing the entire world to ask, how did we allow this to happen? Europe lay in ruins. Cities like Warsaw, Berlin, and London were flattened. The global economy was shattered, famine, inflation, and mass unemployment were widespread. Meanwhile, colonial powers in Asia and Africa began to see their grip weaken, sparking waves of independence movements across the globe. War didn't just redraw borders, it shifted the balance of power. 2 new superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union, preparing to enter a new era. The Cold War this time not fought with bullets, but with ideology and nuclear weapons. Learning from the failure of the League of Nations after World War I, the world came together at the Yalta and San Francisco conferences, where the United Nations was established in 1945 with a noble goal to prevent war from recurring. 5 major powers, the US, the UK, France, the Soviet Union, and China, became permanent members of the Security Council, each holding veto power over global decisions. Though its effectiveness is still debated, the United Nations remains a symbol of international cooperation, something sorely absent in the past when the world chose isolation over dialogue. World War II left the deepest scar in modern history, but from that pain, humanity learned more than any school could ever teach. It learned the value of peace after experiencing immense loss. It learned the importance of dialogue after silence once led to destruction. It learned the power of unity when diverse nations stood together against evil. Personal reflection. World War II taught humanity a costly lesson about the devastation of war, but from the ashes we also learned about solidarity, courage, and the longing for peace. Amid the cries and rubble, there were still hands held tightly and eyes looking toward the future. History is not meant to be repeated, it is meant to be remembered, understood, and learned from. World War II closed like a painful yet necessary chapter in human history. It proved that no nation can survive in isolation, and no people can rise through hatred alone. We live today in peace, freedom, and progress because millions fell and because the world once collapsed to learn how to stand again. And above all, we must never forget